Hello, everybody. This is the second scientific animism thing. We're discussing stuff again. We've got a good crew of people who have put together um, a list of papers, largely, I would say, from what I was observing, largely thanks to the efforts of Daniel and John. The REBUS paper, talking about pivotal free states and the default mode network, all of that coupled together with free energy is, to me, how I've conceptualized this, whereas like we're talking about this rebus model of brain activity being sort of like all over the place versus like a default mode network where there is a, maybe some more constrained activity to a subset of the brain. And we started already talking about what that might mean. And then the other things are perhaps downstream. We'll get to that. But hi, I'm Darlene. I did some research in computer science. So I've done formal training through my PhD and finished that about a year and a half ago. Now I'm mostly an independent scientist-ish thing. I'm going to move to just the next person on my screen. Daniel, would you care to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Daniel. I don't have like a formal background in what we're going to discuss. I'm just really interested in all this stuff and really like to read up on it and research things like minds and psychedelics and stuff like that, all with what we're trying to like focus on in this group, I guess, a bit like our like human predicament, like how we kind of like steering onto this like cliff edge and like how all of this kind of hangs together. And yeah, just nice to have discussion with people that are interested in the same stuff.
I'm going to just keep going on my screen. So John, could you say hello?
Okay, yes. I'm also, I don't know. I'm on the psychology side. I'm not really, it's not really not my, I've done a whole, right now I'm retired, so I don't, I got lots of time to read, obscure papers like, Octopus and, you know, Rebus, which for people that are listening, that's an acronym for REBUS. It's the oh damn, what is it again?
Relaxed beliefs under psychedelics.
Yes, relaxed belief under psychedelics. They selected letters out of each of those words to make the acronym REBUS. And yeah, so that's what we're reading today, or that's the sort of, I think, sort of the central paper. Yeah, and oh yeah, so what about me? Yeah. So I have a PhD in physics. If that, that gives me credentials. I don't usually say that though, I did one time when I was on jury duty because I wanted to get credentials so I could, trash talk this hospital. But so sometimes it's useful. But let's see now. I was an academic for quite a few years doing research and teaching and stuff. But then, that was in University of New Orleans. And then in 2005, we split because the whole place got destroyed by a non-existent, climate disaster. And since then, I've lived here in Louisville, Kentucky, doing, basically getting, shafted by capitalism over and over again until finally I'm retired. I worked in medical physics, so I do have some, that's basically cancer therapy with radiation. I was sort of like the nursemaid to a machine that gave out radiation doses to people, and that lasted until like about till like 2013, right? And then like big money took in the States. Like all these hedge fund types took over the hospitals. That's why they don't work, right? And that got kicked out, during a downsizing or whatever the hell they call it. And so then I went into data science. That was the next thing that I got to make a living. And yeah, and so actually I gained some experience dealing with generative models. That's how I sold it to these people to get into there to make a probabilistic graphical model, which is basically what it's sort of the same thing as Kristen's free energy thing, right? But he kind of like pushes this whole idea of free energy, which is just, to me, it's just like a technique for calculating, but I guess it has all sorts of aesthetic qualities because it sort of aligns with statistical physics. And then, yeah, so that brought me to like, I'm retired now, so I don't really do anything except read, papers that I don't really understand. So that's my story.
Oh, thanks, John.
Yeah.
Uku, would you like to say hello?
Hello, I'm Uko. I'm much younger than John. I haven't had any academical training,
Look at you.
but I am interested in this stuff. But I also don't quite understand it, so I'll be here mostly to ask questions and be confused.
Sam?
Hello.
We can hear you.
Oh, okay. Hello. I'm Sam. I'm kind of new here in this group. Just imagine me as a random guy who stumbles upon a group of scientists and doesn't know where he's at right now. So yeah, I'm also interested in psychology, but not in a technical sense. More on like a personal kind of thing, like I would talk to people and such. I'm not a therapist. No, I'm just interested in how people work in general, whether it's my friends or some random stranger on the street or whatever. I'm saying now a bunch of words to fill up the time that I have, and now it's over.
Thanks, Sam. Isaac?
Hey, I'm Isaac. I was in school up until second year engineering, and then I quit because I thought that it wasn't going to be that valuable to be stuck in the engineering business while the world is collapsing. So that's why I'm here. And I'm also here because this is just so interesting. I'm really excited to hear everyone's thoughts. I think everyone has really unique insights in this group. So yeah.
Thanks. Polly, finally.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Pauli. I have well, I mean, I'm like a I'm an ecologist. I have like education in ecology and evolutionary biology, and then also geoinformatics. But I mean, I work as like a kind of like a landscape ecologist and a researcher with vegetation communities and some greenhouse gas folks stuff. But so not really, neuroscience. But yeah, it's been an interesting read. Can't say I'm completely like up to date on everything that's going on in these papers, but I think like it's formed itself into like a model in my head that's not necessarily something that I can very easily kind of articulate, but I think like I have an understanding of what the general story is at this point. But yeah, I guess let's get into it.
Let's start with that, like a general model. Like I kind of like started my model, but I had this impression that perhaps those of you that actually read the REBUS paper would be able to better state like how that's different. Because like to me, like the default mode network is like this. Like at one point I encountered research like from neuroimaging that was like the default mode network kind of just shows up as this sort of statistical truth that pops up consistently. Like there's this just like signal component that's consistently this network that pops up, and it's easy to catch on all sorts of just like long-term scans. And then I don't know, I have a general like skeptical attitude. And this research, the review from this person who started like default mode, or one of like sort of like the, I guess, more key figures of the research, was asked to write this 20-year report. And I found it in general much more compelling as to why it's so valuable. It's like so clearly, it is clearly talking about something about the stability point that brains manage to hold on to, for, I guess, their default mode. I don't know if I like the default mode, but just like maybe just like how it manages to localize into sort of like a stronger stability point is how I would think about it. And then the rebus is just basically saying like that stability point is sort of thrown entirely out of whack. Like there's just like entropy just like shoots up, and all of a sudden there's like perhaps just that sort of I like attractor and stability basin sort of like analogies. So it's like all of a sudden like the landscape just kind of flattens, and then just like the consciousness sort of like rides around this like giant sheet that doesn't have any particularly like large basins to sort of sit in, and it just like moves around. So perhaps pivotal mental states, it was the like most interesting aspect for me. Daniel, do you have anything you want?
I don't know, maybe we should like look at like maybe take the REBUS paper at like a starting point, and then go from there to like what is the default mode network, because it was kind of unclear, and now it's becoming more clear to the last years, I would guess. And then the pivotal mental states is kind of like a extension of the REBUS thing, I would say, maybe, to like non-psychedelic experiences that compare to what REBUS is kind of trying to model. I don't know, so to start from the REBUS paper, I would say that to like just to give like an introduction, it's based on the idea that the brain does hierarchical predictive processing. No, that you have like hierarchical levels in the brain, and every level tries to predict what the level below it is doing. And if it's not doing what it thinks it's doing, it sends up a prediction error. And the whole REBUS model, how I understand is, it says that if you take psychedelics, basically what the serotonin does, it weakens those higher level priors, they're called, those higher level abstract patterns that you have kind of recognized from the world and you use to predict the lower levels. So these get weakened. So you have more information traveling up from the bottom, because those top priors don't filter down or constrict the information coming from the bottom so much. I think that's how I understand the REBUS paper. And then he says that probably in humans there's this top heaviness in the hierarchy where we tend to give too much weight to those high level abstractions, so that they kind of restrict our view of the world and restrict our possibility to adapt, kind of, to be flexible with what comes up. Yeah. And I don't know if anybody wants to say something to that.
That was my understanding too. I mean, like, not as articulate there, but I had the same kind of understanding.
Yeah, I kind of dug into the sort of the method of control, right? Because like I'm always skeptical when people say hierarchy, it's kind of like a ideologically loaded word, And I wish they would say nested, because that's actually more accurate than, because hierarchy is sort of like control and, do what you're told kind of, this implicit, well, in any case, yeah. So, yeah, it's this precision weighting and prediction error. It's like the higher level essentially takes the same observation. So you have like these observations, and then there's this machine, this stat machine, this Bayesian machine. Like you have prior beliefs, which which sort of skew a probability distribution, which is then updated through an observation in the likelihood, I think it's called. And that produces a posterior, which is an updated belief, right? And the hard part about it is calculating this denominator, which is like I don't know, there's different words for it, like marginal likelihood, or else evidence, they sometimes call it. But it's like the denominator in the thing, right? So that's a really tough thing to calculate. And so that's why you need this pre-energy thing in order to calculate that quickly, because otherwise you'll sit there like for the age of the universe trying to calculate it. And so the thing that higher levels, the more abstract previous prior beliefs, what they do is they kind of condition or restrict the precision of the lower level distributions. Precision, if you think of a Gaussian distribution, like precision, high precision means a really skinny distribution. So it's almost like if then kind of thing, right? It's either 0 probability or 1 probability. So that's like a really confident belief, right? And if the distribution is really wide, well then it's a really unconfident belief, and that's the same thing that's another interpretation of entropy. Essentially, is like low entropy is a skinny distribution, and high entropy is a uniformly distributed, anything's equally possible distribution. And so, the free energy is kind of like the log inverse of a probability distribution, roughly speaking. It's another way of describing a distribution, sort of. I mean, that's one way of looking at it. So when they say that, oh, you're flattening the distribution, basically you're saying that the belief has gone from really precise to imprecise. And so essentially what these higher levels things are doing, they're saying, oh, I believe this, you have to have it, when you see that's not an elephant that you're seeing. I mean, no, that's not a tree. No, I believe that's an elephant. And because, it's telling it that it has to have this really precise distribution, the higher level does. And so the lower level says, oh yeah, oh, that's an elephant. Or it updates its distribution and says, oh yeah, it's kind of like an elephant. Yeah. Even though it's actually a tree, I mean, that would be like sort of the,
So
idea of the psychosis, or whatever the mental illness would be, that your higher level beliefs are really effed up, and you're trying to see something that's not actually there, kind of, in terms of perception or whatever, visual perception. And so this whole model of, I think it's like 5 levels, or they have like a physiological correspondence. There's 5 cortical levels that people have seen, that's kind of like where the hierarchy thing comes from too, there's five layers of cells in the outer cortex, I guess. You know, like these pyramidal cells. And that's actually also the sort of the metaphorical inspiration for neural networks, by the way. You know, well, they must be like layers, because that's how the brain works, right? And so they make these algorithms that are layered. I don't know if you've seen that, but yeah. Anyway, so the control thing comes from the higher levels, basically forcing the lower level perceptual or less abstract things to skew its distribution to a really skinny thing, right? And if that's effed up, then you have some kind of mental illness. It's the sort of the gist of it, I believe. And when you take psychedelics, the serotonin thing, which is kind of like says, no, just, cool it, open the distribution, and, have an anarchic brain, as this Carhart fellow says, anarchic or entropic brain, so basically loosen up the prior distributions so that, you can be more flexible, more plastic. Neuroplasticity, I think they use that term a lot. And that's actually a good thing, because, evolutionarily, that's a good thing, because, you make, I don't know about you, but usually I'm wrong, right? And so if you're not willing to update your beliefs, that's really bad, You're not going to make it in this world if you don't update your beliefs, right?
I think the hardest part about this stuff for me, as far as just like updating my beliefs to sort of be comfy with this particular like organization of like seeing it as seeing this system as like a lower level through upper level, like there's a lot of recurrent connections throughout the brain, like even the example of like the elephant, right? Like the ideas of like particularly like elements that would identify an elephant per se versus like mammals in general, like those are like, it's like a region specific function, if I recall correctly, like the temporal lobe, you get like temporal dementia and slowly you lose the ability to like distinguish creatures effectively. So let's say like dogs and cats all look the same because they've got 4 legs or something like that. So like that I don't, like the model described, at least the model you're describing sounds to me like it's like it's a highly precise, it's a highly analytic expression potentially of what the brain is doing, which makes it great for simulation, or makes it great for potentially being able to sort of reproduce in a lab or a computer. But I like given then that you still have like connections to like the midbrain, or like thalamic connections that are like basically like connecting the entirety of the brain together through these like high speed sort of like ancient brain interfaces. Excuse my engineering predisposition, but like there's these like high speed connections there that like those things are also affecting the whatever we call these like ultimately posterior distributions. I find the concept of the prediction machine necessarily, like perhaps prediction is sort of more of like a stability inducer, like when we talked like in the pivotal mental states, like the psychosis being like sometimes you sort of like lean into the delusion, even if you may not even know that it's real, because the delusion keeps the more anarchic brain system from breaking down completely. And so you kind of like use belief and prediction to sort of hold consciousness together sometimes. That's something I could say I find personally valuable and useful for my own brain. So yeah, I guess like the focus on prediction, like it sounds like an analogy that sounds like a mechanistic, like which is great for like creating like artificial neurons. And like I was saying before, like the free energy, like the expression of it in terms of there's like ultimately a probability distribution that needs to be mapped or needs to be like correctly surmised through slowly like removing all of the free energy that's like from the prediction to the real. So it's like humans are doing other stuff besides predicting. Yeah, that's what keeps me skeptical for sure here.
I see what you mean. Like I also think it's more like of a way to look at it, but I feel like the thing that there is something hierarchical going on. I
Sure.
think that's obvious even if you don't view it from that prediction perspective. Kind of even if you go like your typical like object recognition, you have your like V1 and then your lines, and like it goes to more abstract forms, to more abstract things and categories, and you have this system where you have like this really like entropic or high dimensional information streaming in from the senses, no, and then you have some form of computational hierarchy that like abstracts from this very high dimensional information to get like lower dimensional, more abstract information out of it, no, like more general patterns and stuff like that. So there's some form of reduction of like complexity going on, no, I think something like that maybe. And then I think what you were saying, or someone was saying before as well, like I think John said that hierarchy always has this political thing and this power thing. Maybe it's better to think of it as this like gradient, or how it's called sometimes as well, or this computational gradient or something like that. But what the REBUS thing alludes to as well is that what can happen, what seems to happen in humans a lot, is that this gradient becomes a hierarchy because those like higher level, more rigid, abstracted priors kind of impose themselves onto that upstreaming high dimensional stuff too much sometimes, so it gets too rigid. And
it's always like a hierarchy. Like it gets more flattened on the psychedelic when you're on psychedelics, but it's always like a hierarchy. But it's like it's almost like, well, this is how I've been conceptualizing it. Tell me if I'm wrong, but it's like it becomes really it's kind of silly. It just relates to how society is now for me, but it's like it's more coercive. Like the top level is just like getting to make decisions regardless of what the levels below it are like giving data to it, and it's like forcing its perception onto the other levels. That's what I was getting from it. But I don't know. That was related to how our system works currently. But it's always like a hierarchy. It's just that the top level starts just deciding what the bottom level should be seeing or whatever, and then it's no longer like.
I like to think of it as more of an onion rather than a building, you know.
Oh right, yeah, okay.
You know, and it's not, you know, the control, quote unquote, is really just like the outer level is sort of setting the conditions for the inner level, and so it controls it in the sense that it allocates, you know, I guess, information and whatever physical things that it can experience on the inner sphere, right? And so I like to think that it's concentric spheres as opposed to, you know, like you know, gravity dropping down, you know, throwing stuff down
Right, okay, yeah. I like that one more too.
The guys in the castle throwing, boiling oil on you to control you. Anyway, the yeah. As far as like the mechanistic view of the free energy and the whole like, oh, the brain, this whole idea of that the brain is just a big probabilistic graphical model, which that's sort of like the technical version of if you want to visualize it, it'd be like nodes with edges with little balls with lines in between them, like a mathematical graph. That's sort of like the uh, I guess a computer science view of things. And it's probably true. The thing I like about that is that it does conceive of the machine as not like a internal combustion engine, where everything is perfectly in position and it always fires at the same time, and there's no room for error, yada yada. And that's sort of that's sort of the view that people have in the 19th century of Newton and such. Uh, but having a probabilistic model, I think, is much more realistic because gosh, uh, things always don't happen. Sometimes you can always say, oh, it's just more likely to happen. I mean, that's if you say that. I mean, the world is a lot more comprehensible, than saying oh, it always has to be this or it always that. If you say, oh, it's 50-50 chance that it'll be this or 60-40, then you can sort of make sense of things. And I think that the whole if you like the whole Bayes machine, I think constantly updating these distributions through an iterative process. I mean that's the one thing they never say about Bayes's rule is that oh, there's this magical prior that comes out of nowhere, right? And then it's updated and makes a posterior. Well, not really. I mean, I think it's better to look at is like you have this prior update posterior, and then the posterior becomes the prior in the next iteration. And that's really what they're saying here. And I think that's a better, I mean, I guess you could say it's still mechanistic. It's a machine to a certain extent, but it's a probability machine, so it's less tyrannical, if you like, and it's more adaptive. And in that sense, I think it's probably true. And it also, it has the idea of both prediction and precision, because, like you all were talking about maps and stuff, Dick, the map is not the same thing as the territory. Yeah, and people say this sort of thing all the time, but the thing that really drives me crazy, especially, having done experimental physics for so many years, is that, your fucking numbers don't mean shit if you don't have a precision on it. If I went to a meeting and I put some numbers on a graph, I didn't have any error bars on it, I get laughed off the stage. And yet, there's almost like this ideological thing, especially in business, like, oh my God, when I went into like these big mega corporations, it's like these business people, they refuse. It's like if you talk about error, they just freak out. Like there's no such thing as error. Everything's perfect and precise. A number is like the absolute truth, and it's just such nonsense.
Isn't that like a cultural reflection of prediction errors becoming priors becoming too weighted, like too rigid in a way? I don't know.
You froze up there, Daniel.
Oh, sorry. Isn't that like the cultural equivalent to like priors becoming too rigid or too weighted?
Oh yeah.
Too well weighted? Like, oh yeah, we don't want any error. It's just this or this, and that's it.
We can't have any. Yeah, so that's a delusional mental illness, definitely.
Circle back to
So,
something.
oh my God, these rulers are just like so rigid, and they believe this stuff, and there can't, oh yeah, I'm so confident, and it's kind of contagious, like if people believe, like they like politicians and such, they have these performance of ultra confidence, which is just a bullshit act, right? It really convinces people, and it's kind of like a nasty old mechanism of control, you know, like these fake confidence that these people have. Anyway, that's getting off topic. What I'm saying is I really like the idea of representing a belief as a probability distribution because it has both the value, the average, and the precision. That is, how bad is your value, you know. It incorporates error bars and numbers into it, you know, so it's much more realistic. So what I was going to say though, in terms of mapping the world, says yes, you know, if you just have a bunch of, you know, average numbers that is your map of the world, you know, usually those things are just awful, you know, like because, you know, people are just so damn lazy they haven't bothered to calculate the precision, you know, the error bars. So if you put error bars on your map, then you know that you have like some sort of reading as to whether your map sucks or not, right? Because if, you know, most of these maps of the world that people have terrible precision, you know. They're just nonsense and they don't mean anything because the values that they're assigning, and nobody knows what the precision is, you know. So you don't know if their map sucks or not. You know, a lot of it. So a lot of us. I mean, that's how propaganda works. I think mostly you just make a horrible map and, you know, fake precise. You know, so oh well. So much for renting. You know. So you see, yeah, that's the reason why I kind of like the thing I don't like about it though is that it seems like I just can't imagine how it could possibly be physiologically instantiated, you know. Really, you think that these neurons are going to make a, you know, probability, you know, how can you instantiate a distribution, you know? How can a bunch of neurons just spontaneously make this, you know, Bayes machine? Really? I can't see it, and I have yet to see any kind of, you know, I mean, I've been looking at these studies of, you know, it's kind of gruesome, you know, but they actually take mice and like map, you know, do studies where I guess they kill the mouse and then look at how the neurons are attached, and so you can sort of see how it actually works. And it doesn't seem like it's very likely to get a, you know, this sort of, you know, free energy principle actually instantiated in a bunch of neurons. To me, it seems much more likely it's just sampling, you know, that's a, you know, I mean, if these brain regions represent probability distributions, I think it must be constructed not by some, you know, transcendent free energy principle. It's much more likely it's just sampling, you know, just doing things over and over, you know, sampling is just like shaking the die and I get a off two or something, you know. Because if you look at the way it's actually working, it's like firing all the time, right? There's constantly these spikes going all over the place. And so if it is building a distribution, it's probably doing it in a good old frequentist way, you know, just sampling a whole shitload of times and then sort of accumulating a probability, if you like, through sampling, you know, through, I guess, that's a whole ball game of probability distribution. And if you look at it, you know, like this Friston and his sort of aesthetic thing about free energy, you know, it's a really beautiful thing in you know, like in like condensed matter physics, you know, like the free, you know, crystals form and so forth based on a minimum free energy. But you know, people actually calculate stuff using sampling, you know, like Monte Carlo techniques, you know, so I guess you could say that, well, I think that the brain actually samples all the time in order to actually calculate a probability. I mean, to me, that seems much more likely given the physiology of how neurons actually work. So anyway, that's what I don't like about Friston's free energy thing.
I do kind of buy that. That makes sense. Because it just makes sense to me. I don't have a good way to articulate that. It's just the data coming in and then building something from the data.
Yeah. So in that case, the higher levels would have like a previously learned, you know, distribution, if you like, that's controlling lower level, saying, oh, it's got to be like this, according to this theory of free energy principle theory, the hierarchical control idea of, the precisions controlling the distributions at the lower level.
Yes, so the thing about the like different levels in the hierarchy thing, for what it's worth, yeah, like ideologically a choice of words, I guess, or at least I find it disagreeable. But so there's also like so there's a couple different ideas that pop up for me around the just the involvement of other like older brain regions, basically, like evolutionarily speaking. The default mode network, I spent some time looking around this last, like, with the stuff during the stuff that we read, like looking at like temporal lobe stuff and how it does sort of like the default mode network includes the amygdala and includes some of the hippocampal regions. Yeah, right. So maybe Daniel, and you said you're doing potentially even doing a review paper soon, so you might.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, default mode network. It's kind of well, I can try to like do like a little introduction of what it supposedly is. It showed up like in end of the 90s on PT scans, when they did PT scans on people, and they said, oh, do this task while you're in the scanner, do this task while you're in the scanner. And then they saw that while they were not doing tasks, there was this group of regions that always showed up like in between tasks. So they thought that was just like they had to subtract that. That's just like the default thing, and that's it. And then they kind of saw that it is like unresting state functional MRI. They saw that it is a network that does come up online together like all the time. And first they thought they defined it as like a what is it called? Task negative network, like a brain network that's deactivated when there's a task. And then they saw that it's mainly tasks focused on the outside world, like perceptual tasks that deactivate it. It's like anti-correlated with the default attention network, dorsal attention network, it's called, which is more a network concerned with your sense of space and your movement in space, and it comes online when you do stuff in space and tasks and stuff like that. And later on, they saw that it does come online on goals, like goal-oriented tasks, when the goals are more like internally, like you have to simulate a future event or think about something in the past. It's highly correlated with mind wandering, and social cognition, theory of mind as well, episodic memory, semantic memory. People say the semantic network is kind of part of it. Like the main regions it's the medial prefrontal cortex, like all the like medial regions, which here in the front, and then like more on the back, the PCC, posterior cingulate cortex, which is like on the inside, kind of, and parts of the temporal lobes as well, and the angular gyrus, which is up here. And like the most interesting studies that I found about the default mode network, which I think tell a lot about what it is actually about, are those where they correlated, not usually when they do those functional MRI, they correlate blood flows in between one brain, and they did that with different brains listening to the same story in like different languages, or the same story presented by different modalities. One watching the story in a movie, one listening to the story, and stuff like that. And they found that activations in this default mode network region was correlated between people. So it seems that it kind of represents more abstract narratives, like the same people watch the same narrative in different languages. You have very different activations in like central areas, but you have the same activations in those default mode network areas, because they are areas that kind of represent the abstracted narratives from the data kind of. And then I think what
is the main evidence for the abstract, that default mode network is abstract?
kind of, and then the whole gradient stuff came up. There was like 2016, the paper. Usually that's why we talk so much about networks. They did on this functional MRI stuff, they usually did like clustering analysis, like, oh, which clusters come on together, and they found all these networks. There's like those 7 networks. There's a 7 network and like an 11 network postulation that always comes up in those papers. And in this study from 2016, they looked at it not to cluster it, but they looked into how to decompose it into gradients that explain the variance of the functional connectivity in the brain. So they did, what is it called? Diffusion map embedding or something like that. But you could also do it, it seems you can also do it with like normal principal component analysis. And they found that there's like one gradient in the brain that explains the most differences in functional connectivity through the brain. So it kind of like this gradient orders brain regions by how closely they're related in their connectivity. And you find that on one end of this gradient, you have your senses, basically, your visual network and your somatosensory network. And on the other side, like the top end is the default mode network. And all the other networks, they kind of align. So you have like the sensory networks. After that come the attentional networks, dorsal and ventral attentional network. Then the frontal-parietal network, which is more like the control network, your frontal control network. And after that, the limbic and default mode network. So it's kind of on top of this hierarchy, and it's the most removed from sensory input. And they found that this gradient correlates to the distance on the cortex. Like those regions of the default mode network are also those regions that, if you like literally would take a tape measure and go along the cortex, are those regions that are furthest away from visual and somatosensory input. So they speculate, or they say, this removedness from sensory input has made this region so important in human evolution, because they are also the regions that mostly expanded in human evolution compared to ancestors. And they say this removedness from the senses and this abstractness kind of gave some sort of creativity to us that helped us in a way, or that made us human. And I think that's true because all our cultural world is based on these narratives that kind of seem to have to do with this more abstract, more abstract levels, kind of. Yeah. So they situated it on top of this gradient, and then later found that this gradient corresponds to a lot of like biological gradients as well. What I said before, also, like these are the regions that evolutionary came latest or expanded latest. Also in ontogeny, like in development, these are the regions that usually develop last, I think, up until the 30s. So the default mode network kind of represents the top of this hierarchy. Yeah, here we are again in the hierarchies, and that's why it might be implicated as well so much in psychopathologies like depression, stuff like that, and also in all the psychedelic stuff, because the serotonin receptors also sit on top of this gradient. Like the regions on top of this gradient have more serotonin 2A receptors than the rest, except visual cortex. But yeah.
Is there like because you said there's like either 7 or 11 different like networks depending on what kind of clustering you're doing. So I guess that kind of points to that it's like, they're, well, not arbitrary, but like kind of arbitrary. It's kind of like dividing it into, they're not like discrete in any sense.
I don't know a lot about that, but from the
Okay.
paper I've read, when you do those clustering analysis, you have to say how many clusters you want to get out of
Obviously,
it.
yeah.
And so they go through a lot of different ones and then compare how much they explain the data, kind of. And they found that the 7 network one, and I think it was 11 network one, are the ones that explained the most data, kind of. Yeah. But it's kind of arbitrary.
The REBUS paper used the default mode network as a evidence for their hierarchical control thing, that where they said that your ego and all these sort of higher level things are represented in the default as evidence for their theory. Yeah, so. And I remember hearing about the default mode network 15 years ago, and it was like in a popular science thing where they said, oh, people with depression, they don't space out because their default mode network is never like accentuated. I don't know, that was probably just a passing fad. But anyway, yeah, so I always thought of the default mode network as spacing out, because it lightens up. It lightens up when you're not thinking about or you're not attending to something. Yeah.
But then I guess we can think about the default mode network, or I guess that's kind of the point here, is that that's the place where these kind of, generally speaking, like the priors and this kind of beliefs kind of live or exist. Right.
Yeah, kind of the highest levels, no? Yeah.
Yeah.
That's my understanding. Yeah. So that'd be the most coarse grain, of all the, concepts or whatever. So that's where your ego is, and all this sort of stuff.
Do we have like any, like from the models we've just been discussing, do we have any like idea or like suggestion on how the brain would move from default mode to other modes, in the sense of like what like triggers a movement from one of like along the gradient, right? Like what moves the gradient, what moves the state of consciousness through the gradient that you were describing? If there's anybody that could. Yes.
According to this Friston model, it would be it would be, I mean, there's two different things happening. There's a top down and a bottom up, right? These coming from your senses are going up and trying to update each level, based on new evidence. In the Bayesian machine, there's a Bayes machine at each level, and so like the perceptions come from the bottom, they update the next level. Those each level gets its perception as well, and so there's a higher level has a prior, inputs it into the lower level through a precision input, right? So it says your distribution has got to be such and such, it's because I believe this, right? It skews the posterior of the lower level by inputting a precision into the Bayes machine at each level. So so it's a precision weighting control that goes from the top down, and the bottom up system is trying to push through these Bayes filters, trying to update these, no, it's not it's an elephant. No, it's a tree, And so they are constantly updating using information from the bottom up. And so a lot of the psychosis that, or not psychic, but mental illnesses that they're discussing are different breakdowns of this. Basically, mostly, well, it depends. You know, sometimes the bottom up is too strong, and that would correspond to autism, like for example, and sometimes the top down is too strong, and that would correspond to schizophrenia. You know, your beliefs, you know, you have delusional beliefs, like a lot of the mental illnesses where you have, you know, delusions, you know, oh, I'm Jesus, you know, whatever, I'm Napoleon. Those would be schizophrenic. You have beliefs that somehow have been instantiated in a high level, but none of the information is coming from the, you know, and so, but the top down thing is for these psychotic delusions. And like the other example I can think of right offhand is autism, where basically there's absolutely no filtering going on, and so everything's bottom up, you know, and you can never really make a coarse-grained, you know, conceptual view of and try to organize, you know, the chaos of the real world, you know, through through this whole machine, through this whole Bayes machine that comes from the top down. So a lot of these mental illnesses, I think that's sort of the point of the paper, is that a lot of these mental illnesses support this view of the free energy principle. So, and I find it kind of persuasive, actually, or at least, you know, at least it organizes the. It's sort of a central organizing thing for all of these mental illnesses, you know, little definitional clusters that don't come out of nowhere, right? But this gives it sort of a central framework for thinking about it, I think, which I like that. Yeah, that's a good part about this work.
But I think like if you're asking about like how the consciousness moves along this gradient, it's like I just think that like how is this kind of this gradient that Daniel was talking about and these default mode networks, like what's their relationship to consciousness anyway? I don't think we've like touched on that anyway, because I think like from what I've understand from the papers is that all the more kind of consciousness like stuff is like towards this abstract end of this kind of brain function gradient or whatever, where that kind of takes place in general. Or does anyone have any?
I don't know. I'm not sure about that, but to come back to Darlene, maybe like the only thing I can think about is like these anti-correlations that exist. So your dorsal attention network is like very highly anti-correlated with your default mode network. So if when you're doing stuff that involves physically moving your body, that kind of pulls you out of that, I guess. And in general, stuff that focuses attention on the senses. Maybe attention is like the thing, you know, like that kind of moves or kind of I don't know, kind of can incorporate more levels or less levels at one time. I don't know how to explain that exactly, but maybe it's your attentional flexibility that can kind of play with that. I don't know. Yeah.
Really, meditation
Okay.
is sort of like intentional, like a driver of this gradient. I'm not practiced or anything of meditation, but it makes sense to me from what I've practiced that like you can move from from places of attention to total lack of attention, if perhaps that's a fair way to say it. Like so if there's some sort of intentionality that we could connect to movement in the gradient anyway, but I take your point about like consciousness potentially just being localized to like maybe this like egoic / default mode network space.
I don't know. I was just type of hypothesizing or just thinking. Yeah.
I did look at that. I mean, I in this Rebus paper, they went on and on about, oh, this hierarchy is controlling that. And I wanted to find an example of that. And I did find this Priston paper where he talked about attention, right? He built it, they basically built their same, their generative model, whatever. They called it a Markov decision thing. And essentially it's well, I mean, they have like a simple model Bayesian thing, with states and prior and such, and they kind of expand on this idea of you see an observation, you update the likelihood of it, and you have prior beliefs about it, and attention. The bottom attention layer was just like seeing things and updating a prior belief and so forth. And then the next layer was the second layer was a way of selecting policies, because there's really like two free energy principles. There's both the I guess they say I mean, a free energy always has two terms, and it's basically balancing two goals, if you like. The sort of the mechanistic goal of minimizing the energy, and it's constantly being thwarted by randomness of entropy and temperature, if you like. And so this free energy thing always minimizes the balance between those two, if you like, conflicting things, right? And they have like one free energy is just for minimizing, if you like, the perceptions, and the other one is like for predicting into the future, right? So they have so they have like a predictive thing which involves a policy or strategy, sequence of decisions, is what a policy is, and so one of the free energies generates this policy, and the other free energy like brings stuff from the bottom up, if you like, the perceptions and just locally in time updating these beliefs, and so the second layer was just I think it was controlling the second layer, trying to sort of abstract it a bit, and the third layer was what they called meta attention. It's like it was this Bayesian machine that sort of says, which thing am I going to pay attention to? So it would had this policy of deciding, I'm going to pay attention to this, or I'm going to. So that was one instance. The only thing that kind of confused me is that I was talking about this precision control. Like the higher level would always input a precision, a width of the distribution into the lower level, but the prior distribution. And in this paper, they were into a different thing. It was the precision was going into the likelihood distribution and not into the priors. So that was, I don't know if that's I guess.
What is a prior also? I'm really confused what that means.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So in Bayesian stats, you have a prior distribution. It's like what you believed, like in Bayesian statistics, probability distribution is a belief, right? It's not.
Right.
So, and so a prior belief is what you thought, before. Like, I think that this coin is 50-50, right? And then you actually flip the coin and it always comes up heads. That would be like the likelihood, the evidence, and you multiply those two to get a posterior, updated belief. So that is like the basic machine that this Priston thing is about, right? So you're
Right.
constantly updating your beliefs through gathering evidence, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
This bigger model that he built basically had metacognition on the top layers controlling the controller of the cognition, So that was an actual model that they built, which was kind of different than what they're discussing in the REBUS thing, you know, because it was the whole control, precision control was different, you know. And it's a bit more complicated because these three distributions I was talking about, the likelihood, the prior, and the posterior, they also have like these parameters that you put into them, you know, like you can tell the distribution to be really tight by through this another. It's kind of like the beauty of these Bayesian things, you know. It's like you can sort of control the parameters or make the parameters a probabilistic well. So that's basically what they're saying is the higher level machine, you know, Bayesian machine does is input a precision value into the lower level Bayesian machine. So that's how these hierarchical levels actually function. That was what I got out of that nasty paper. It was a long slug, but I never actually finished it. So you know, I got pretty close though. So I don't know if that was comprehensible or not, but like you
It was
say.
a little, it was comprehensible, but the stream was a little laggy.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
That'd be it's the technology
Oh well.
that we have to use.
Yeah.
Oh.
So my big takeaway from what John's been saying is that there's like variance that's propagating throughout the system. Like there's like an analysis of like variance and then potentially more statistical moments on some level potentially that's just being sent throughout the brain, which causes, I mean, something that I spent a good amount of like fun math time doing was like looking at like statistical moments as like fractals and like continue like so there's like the variance of the standard deviation basically, and then you do like the deviance, like the variance of that, and then you keep doing that over and over and over again in a sort of like in a sense of like derivatives. Then you can like effectively for certain time series data you can extract sort of like metrics of like its fractal properties, its properties of basically not being able to fit in like one dimension or another, but basically like being constrained within, like bounded by two sort of like traditional Cartesian dimensions, and potentially like moving, the movement between that has some sort of connection to like the generation of information, basically like information entropy and like information quantities. Because in some sense, like when you look at time series on that level, you see repeated patterns depending on the sort of like fractal dimension. There's like I guess there's just like the more homogeneous like expression of this is like you have zones where it looks like total randomness that is embedded in between sort of two different Cartesian-ish dimensions, because it's time series, so it's not Cartesian exactly. There's time, and then there's like variation across a couple indicators. But the variation is periodic depending on the type of so when like talking about this sort of this fractal dimension quality, like that indicates potentially how periodic or aperiodic the signal is, and somewhere in between that system there is this sort of like periodic like metastable place, which is like the most interesting informationally. I don't have a more precise way to say that. It makes like something seriously interesting to me is like when prediction isn't necessarily prediction, but it's also like a generation of newness, like when like randomness effectively becomes something that wasn't there before. And if that So yeah, I guess you could use this variation framework to express something that could still construct novelty, is where my head's on. I wonder if Daniel has something to say. You have a good habit of like unmuting yourself, like right about when...
But you feel like that.
I was
You should be clear that precision is the same thing as variance. I mean, the inverse variance, like, so if you have a distribution, this I get confused by our words here, precision just means smaller variance, right? So you're talking about these distributions, and I guess that's sort of the whole point of the REBUS paper.
The variability of variance over time is also part of what I just want to make sure that's part of expressed.
Yeah. Right.
I think
that reminds me of the whole message of, you hear this a lot in people doing like complex systems, whatever, complex adaptive systems. They always say life is at the edge of chaos.
Yeah.
And I think that the free energy principle kind of captures that idea, in that it has like two different it has organizing part, and then you add up for the energy, which is like, minimizes the thermal randomness part in physics, and all of these formulations of free energy principle have something sort of like that, and in a sense, the minimization of the free energy is sort of an expression of the system, the biological system wanting to go, not go into total chaos, which is bad, and not being too mechanical, because then it can never adapt to a complicated world. But it lives at the edge between chaos and order, at the edge between order and disorder, in order to take advantage of both of those qualities of the world. Yeah, and so by minimizing the free energy, you're kind of like the organism goes towards that barrier where it's not too much chaos, not too much order, or
but I don't think it
not
does.
Too hot, not too cold, just right.
I don't see how
Pardon?
free energy. I don't see how free energy. I think for like that. I think that's what I was saying before. Is like if you're trying to effectively just match some sort of extant probability distribution through prediction, then that sounds to me like effectively minimizing free energy results in essentially like this catastrophically consistently prediction of the same thing, right? Like it doesn't balance it on the sense of the edge of chaos with when you're just minimizing this quantity to match that expected thing. It's Daniel, you were going to say something. Yeah.
But you also have the prediction error coming up from below, kind of, no, which can change the thing. I think it maps quite well to the whole Carhart-Harris stuff. Before he did the REBUS thing, he called it the entropic brain, I think, because he also said something like the brain and the psychedelic state is more entropic because it visits more different states, which kind of relates to what you were saying. I think they measured that in a way like that, like how many different states the brain visits in a time series or something like that. And it seems that the brain under psychedelics becomes more entropic, and that the whole like higher level prior thing is like a suppression of entropy, kind of.
Increase in entropy. Not what it does, it increases the entropic part. That's why the free energy valleys and hills get more flat, and that corresponds to probability distribution that's more uniform, right? And it's the precision, like the precision code goes down and the information goes up, right?
Yeah, so, I would say, yeah, like in the priors in our normal state do the suppression, and then the psychedelics by lowering the weight of the priors kind of release that, no? I think, yeah.
Yeah.
And he also writes a lot about criticality, and it comes up quite a lot now in brain stuff again. So that's basically what you were talking about, no? That zone between chaos and rigidity, and yeah, it seems there have been a lot of like stuff, people looking how if our brain is at a critical point through, I think, what was it, like, I don't know exactly how they do it with I think they look at like scaling laws. I don't know.
Yeah.
And it seems that the human brain is slightly subcritical, and so more to the ordered side, and that psychedelics do shift it more to the critical to the critical point. And in the paper before, the Anthropic Brain, we had this quote. Maybe I find it. Oh yeah. Recent work has indeed supported the notion that brain activity is slightly subcritical in normal waking consciousness. One reason why it may be advantageous for the brain to operate just below criticality, as that by doing so, it can exert better control over the rest of the natural world, most of which is critical. Indeed, if control is the objective, then it makes sense that the brain should be more ordered than which it wishes to control. Which kind of makes it,
like, the whole idea of criticality can be simply represented by a shifting of the shape of a free energy as well. Like in this paper, they're talking about like normal states of the free energy landscape is really, it's got mountains and valleys and stuff. And like the simplest example of a critical phenomena where you know, like you go from like liquid gas phase transition, for example. So you have a free energy that like it's in the liquid state, so it's like got a really sharp, deep free energy. But there may be another minimum over here that it doesn't see because it's like that would be like solid, right? So you have solid and liquid, and basically as you change the parameters of the system, this free energy thing shifts shape, right? And so you get like to a point where both gas and liquid have both the same depth, right? So either state would be preferred, you know. So there's no preferred. I'm sorry, I said that wrong. So that neither state is right. And then as you change the pressure and temperature, these two minimum kind of merge and go into one flat minimum, right? And when the minimum is really flat, that's when you get all these, you know, fluctuations like crazy. You know, I used to do experiments with liquid gas and called opalescence. It's really, really beautiful, but basically the liquid at this particular point changes into basically the thermal fluctuations gets at their scatter light, right? Because normally you don't see a fluctuation because, you know, oh, I saw a fluctuation the other day. No, you don't see them, you know, because light just goes right on through a thermal fluctuation and air and liquid and everything. But at this critical point, the liquid gas the fluctuation becomes so huge that they start to scatter light. And so suddenly this clear liquid turns into like this sort of pearly thing, you know. It's really quite beautiful because it looks like liquid pearl. And that's why it's called critical opalescence. It's a point where you can actually see these gigantic fluctuations. Why are they gigantic? It's because you have this really, really flat free energy is how the theory goes. And that's where all of this critical slowing down and large scale correlations and stuff comes from. It's from this really, really flat free energy. So that's the whole idea of that's the essential basic essence of critical phenomenon in physics.
Is that like a supercritical fluid when it does that?
You cut it out there. Super something?
Is it?
Super...
Sorry, this is like just from I was studying thermo and I'm trying to remember. Like when it's like a liquid and a gas at the same time. Is that what it is?
Yeah,
oh,
supercritical. Right, okay. It goes from they're both the same at the critical point. Yeah. And it's a sort of a special point. It's really hard to get to it, you know, because you really have to control everything. Normally, it just goes from liquid to gas, but if you manipulate the temperature and the pressure in such a way, you can reach this critical point. It has all of these critical slowing downs and such. And I guess in this paper, or in the whatever the PIMS paper, they're talking about this as a sort of a analogy for how you make a transition from, I don't know, from being an asshole to being a nice person, that sort of thing. Personality shifts, or psychics.
Yeah.
What's that? PIMS was
The pivotal mental state.
Yeah, that's right. Pivotal mental states. So the pivotal mental state would be analogous to, the state where you have a really flat free energy, and so you're fluctuating all over the place, and you don't, in principle, this free energy would then evolve into two minima again, and you have just as big a greater chance of being in one minimum as you have on the other. And so, that's where the whole controversy of how to do like therapy with psychedelics, like you could also drive this guy crazy if you F it up, because he go into the crazy state, not into the normal state.
Because the system can be so easily perturbed because it's in like such a
unstable kind of
position,
crazily fluctuating state. Yes. Yeah.
You could do like a tiny little thing and it would like perturb the system massively, one way or the other.
Yeah.
Didn't they also say? Oh, sorry. There you go.
I was going to ask,
tricky business. I guess these therapists, they go to great lengths. I guess incense and candles or whatever, to try to make it so that to make the psychedelic experience into a good thing. I don't know if y'all have, I'm an old guy, so I know people who took LSD when they were having an argument with their girlfriend.
Oh my
gosh. Out well,
Oh my gosh, that sounds really bad.
My neighbor, he literally attacked somebody with a pencil and the cops came and got thrown into the institution overnight. His mother had to come and get him. Oh well.
But this thing about this criticality, still, like from the quote that you read, Daniel, like then if it says that the environment is critical, what does that mean in this context?
In this context, I think it means that it's more that it's a little bit more complex than we are, in the sense that it's more flexible. Maybe, I don't know. Like I don't know exactly, but
Okay. So it's like, can it be like explained in more ways, or like is there like more ways to be like than what we can kind of, I don't know. It's just kind of,
Yeah, like the reality is essentially critical, or perhaps nature as we know it, maybe not our living situations per se, but like that abstraction in the brain like makes things subcritical, and then just reality is sort of that like the real criticality. There's like the psychoanalysis is coming up, and it's like the notion of the real, and like that it's just like this unaddressable, unobservable, articulable, etc. Like ineffable. Like that. Yeah. So that's what is meant by criticality. I was wondering if somebody was going to bring up like serotonin 2A as potentially like a like a move towards criticality, and then like 1A is like a potentially to hold at whatever critical point that you might be at. And I really want to ask some questions about how that all it might have like political connotations or people's predispositions to egalitarianism and stuff like that. Would be a really good question.
There's a movie on YouTube. It's called Wild in the Streets. It's from 1968. It's a farce about hippies and stuff. And it's really it's got like all these Hollywood people from the '60s, you know, like I forget what his name is. Anyway, you can go look at it. It's kind of goofy, but basically it's like, you know, anybody under 30 is bad, you know, or is good, and everybody over 30 is bad. Everybody is a hippie who's under 30. And so this guy gets mad at all these politicians, and so what they do is they put LSD into the water system in Washington D.C., and all of the senators and stuff started tripping, and then suddenly and you know, have instantaneous personality transformations, and then the youth take over, you know, and that's the whole gist of the movie. Yeah, it's 50-year-old movie, or 55.
It gets referenced a lot in pop culture, I think, the idea of LSD in the water.
Yeah.
Just to get back to Paulie, I think what he was saying with the criticality thing is that it seems that usually living systems are like living in this critical state, because it's the state between being too flexible, or being not flexible enough, or the state. I think it also has to do a bit with exploitation and exploration, like to find the right spot in between there. And it's what he's saying is that it seems that humans kind of deviate from that rule that natural living things seem to be poisoned in that critical space, by deviating a little bit to one side, to that more rigid side. And here's the hypothesis that it might be control that is doing that. I think it might have a lot to do with sociality as well. I think that because like the thing that makes us human is that we live in cultural groups, and that we can be described as these like cultural superorganisms, that we are almost kind of social insects or something like that. And maybe it's that this cultural superorganism works better when the constituent parts are working a little bit to the subcritical side, because I don't know how to explain it really, but I think like even to like have symbolic culture, and to have like a group that says, oh, a tree is this is this, and shares those more or less rigid like semantic categories and stuff like that.
I think that I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I just think that culture might be some driver of that shift towards subcriticality in some way. Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say that I think that like as far as on a, you know, if you want to do like a, you know, self-similarity thing here, you know, and say, oh, well, the brain, you know, society is like the brain, and if you use Kristen's model of the brain, and this is actually something I actually is that you know, you have too much top-down control from delusional beliefs. Oh, what's that sound like, you know? And you know, well, what's the solution to you know, top-down control that has delusional belief and is apparently mentally ill? Oh, well, you need bottom-up information and you know, a entropic releasing of these ridiculous beliefs through bottom-up you know, so basically we need some serotonin 2A injected into the system, you know. So that's the moral of the story, I guess, at that level.
Yeah, I guess like just technically, I guess it's not a different type of serotonin, it's a different receptor for serotonin. But yeah.
So I guess the question is, where's the serotonin coming from? What is the serotonin?
in the Rebus paper, when it goes to the flattened state, the entropic state where all the peaks have been like minimized when you take psychedelics, they also mentioned that it was like dying. I've been thinking about that like a lot. Like, what do they mean by that? That the flattened state is like a death-like state? I didn't fully understand.
I think they're talking about like the maximum entropy death of the universe thing. Like that's basically what happens when you die. All your cells disintegrate. You turn into dust. Which is a huge increase in entropy, right? So so yeah, I think that's what I got when I read that. That high entropy is death kind of thing.
Right, yeah, no, that makes sense. I was thinking like, what if it's like experientially
That's particular.
death? What if it's like when you get all the crazy colors and you're seeing like just shapes and stuff, that's like you're getting really close to like your consciousness snapping out of its contained state and like becoming one with the universe again.
I had a like a near-death experience, so it's kind of like you're out of your own system, like your own body, almost, right? Where you can somehow perceive things that you wouldn't be able to perceive if you're just in your own body currently. I mean, that's how I recall it when I was dying at one point or 2 points. I forget. Uh, but yeah, like it's like everything is like a blur somewhat, and you can somehow basically out of body experience that kind of shit or whatever, right? Yeah.
That's sick, dude. That's so cool.
Weird.
My dad one time when he was climbing, he he was doing a climb that he had failed before because he froze with his like he was with rangers and he froze doing the climb and then he fell obviously, but he was belayed, so he was like fine. But then he was like, I'm not gonna let this mountain beat me. So he came back there on his motorbike and climbed on it, and he got to the same point and he froze and he couldn't do it. Like he just physically his body couldn't move. And then he said, I'm gonna die. I just killed myself because it was really far up. He was gonna fall and like hit rocks. And he thought, well, if I'm gonna die, I'm gonna die happy. And then he said that he accepted his death and was just gonna be like, I'm just gonna let go and feel bliss. And he let go, and he was like completely at peace with the world. And he landed, and he thought he died, and then he woke up and he was completely fine. And he didn't hit a single part of his body on the rocks. He like everything hurt, but he was fine. Like I think he fractured his skull, but he only found that out years later. And then he just got on his motorbike and went home and had a bath. And he didn't tell his mum because he didn't want his mum to know. But it's crazy because it's like he really did like literally like he came to peace with his own death and then he just didn't die. I thought that was so crazy. So yeah, I guess that didn't really relate as much as I thought it did, but it felt like it related a lot with the out of body experiences. It's really cold in this room that I'm in as well.
From the Rebus paper with this kind of like this dying thing, like feel like it's like if you think about that, like what they talk about, like your like the sense of losing, like ego dissolution with dying, like if you conflate that with like this kind of these beliefs, these priors that you hold, and then if that collapses, like it might do under psychedelics or kind of like if all the peaks and valleys kind of flatten like totally, then like there's like nothing. I guess you could kind of like equate that with like a self, like there's nothing there if it's just like a fully entropic surface. There's no pattern, or there's no like not saying that the selfhood is like can be coded as just like a pattern in a landscape, but like just like generally, and then like that's what happens when you die, and then like that's where like these kind of the sense of dying under psychedelics and kind of comes from, which is very interesting then that you're able to equate that with the idea of dying. I guess it's just like the loss of self.
Well, because you're like a complex structure that's come together, and then obviously if you
Well, in this
flatten and
model.
remove, sorry.
At least like in the sense of in the language of this model.
Oh yeah. No, yeah. Just in general, right? You're like a complex structure that's come together, like a big organization. And then if like all that structure like disappears and it's all flattened, there's no more structure because there's nothing held in place and in tension with anything else. And that would be like death, right? Because it's all just melded back into one like ocean of stuff.
You just become like randomized molecules.
Yeah.
So and
It's kind of
not a coherent structure, not a pattern, as you were saying. So
yeah,
you're completely maximum entropy at that point. So
and it's funny how quite closely related that is then to like the idea of becoming one with the universe or whatever. It's like
I think that's
yeah.
what you become one with the universe when you have maximum entropy. You know, so when you die, you become, yeah, that's so.
Yeah.
So we can all look forward to maximum entropy. I'm going to go there first, you know, so you guys.
But then
tell us about it. Tell us about it.
but then it's like to kind of like maybe draw out or torture this analogy or metaphor or whatever. It's kind of like if like a total flattening, like kind of a loss of any state, is like dying, then like moving from one state to another is like a partial death or like a transition or something, like you lose like one state of being and you go into another, which I don't wait. I felt like I had a point, but I don't know what my point is anymore. But it's kind of fuck. Sorry. I don't know. I felt like that was going somewhere, but I don't know where that would be.
Well, just time evolution is like that, you know, like you just evolve in time. You're constantly making a transition from one moment to the next, you know. So that's you can't escape that. That's like, but I think like making a transition to more and more random thermal noise, you know, that's death, definitely.
Yeah, I guess like no, not yeah, it's not like a dying, it's like more like you're being reborn in a slightly different shape, I guess. Or you're like you go through, like if you think about like this kind of pivotal mental state idea, or like this kind of going from one shape or one state to another, it's like you have to go through a point where you're slightly closer to dying than you are in any like steady state. And then you're kind of, when you again fall into the next valley, you're kind of partially reborn as something else, or like slightly different. Which I mean, I guess like, you know, just like a metaphor too, or maybe not a thing. Yeah.
It makes sense. A lot of this paper for me has been like what I've heard like mystically inclined people like would say, but in a more like a less like schematized kind of way. Like that's what this paper read to me a lot of the time. It was like they found the intrinsic truth in what a lot of people who did like psychedelics found out as well. But they found it in a schema.
It's really nice the way it organizes the whole thing. That's what I found most interesting about this paper, the way it because you know, like before, I mean, I've never really seen a coherent sort of universal theory of mental illness like this, you know, like. And
oh yeah, true.
Yeah, so it all makes
one
sense.
that actually relates to something
covers
real.
all the categories of mental illness, you know, like. If you go through it's a long list and it's all explainable by this whatever predictive coding thing.
Yeah, and I guess it also like enables,
coherent,
it also like makes it possible to kind of delineate between like mental illness and like not mentally ill and neurotypicality and like non-neurotypical or whatever, like in different ways, depending on how you what you assign as to be like this kind of normal weighting of priors versus kind of inputs or whatever, kind of like where you situate like what like yeah and so on. It's just like it falls into this kind of like it's all on a gradient thing, and what's normal is partly a matter of convention.
I also like that it has like what we're talking about, the death thing or the ego dissolution. It has this this aspect of boundaries and boundary dissolution. No, like I think that in those experiences the ego boundary kind of dissolves. No, you're kind of like connected with everything and all that. And it seems that a lot of like self-transcended experiences that might not be caused by psychedelics also include that, like a shrinking of the sense of self, and then a dissolution of it, kind of, and a more connection with the rest of the world, which kind of ties into the biophilia stuff as well, and the stuff we talked about last time. Like, yeah. So what I'm trying to say is maybe like you can also like there's like in between, no, like there's this total ego death where there's no boundary, but maybe people can also develop through, I don't know how, but different like more fluid, more less rigid boundaries, like a less rigid like sense of self, kind of like, which could be correlated with how much precision weighting you kind of give to those higher levels. So, yeah.
Would you think that that's like correlated then, like if you give a lot of like weight to sensory inputs, would like that kind of does that equate more or less to kind of a dissolving boundary of self?
Maybe it does. I don't know. I personally, I think like I'm trying to um to incorporate what I read into like my meditation practice, and I'm trying to meditate more on external like sensory input now, less than like before. I was like closed eyes and looking inside kind of, and I feel that it kind of does like soften that subjective boundary a bit. Like sometimes you feel more like you get more into like flow states or something like that, where you don't have this sense of being a self that looks at the world, more like in the moment, in the thing. I don't know. Yeah.
I think in general, like just the way that like some of these like you were describing, like in your meditation practice or whatever, like the extent to these things, which these things can be then embodied, like this kind of models is also like speaks, like even though it's not very scientific per se, it also speaks kind of some level of validity, like intuitively and so on, like with our experience.
Yeah. I think in general, also like with the psychedelic experience, I think it matches the phenomenology quite well. But yeah, how it feels like. Yeah.
What I find interesting is that because like from the conversation that we've been having, I was like thinking, wait a sec, I've experienced like this ego disillusionment and such without taking psychedelics, even the death part, like the speaking from like experience, I didn't, because there was like a certain thing that I believed for a long time. Let's say for example, it's oh, since all women are like this, therefore my sister's like this, and I'll treat her like this because this is what I've been taught about my sister, right? And I remember growing up with my sister, like that part of myself was dissolving. Like it wasn't just, it was like suddenly, right? It was sudden. And I was like, holy shit, I want to be a good person and all of this, but I'm treating my sister like shit or whatever, right? And so it's like, it's kind of like, I mean, from my own personal experience, it's like my mind is shattering and it's trying to reconstruct itself into trying to live with closer to what, or to who like my sister actually is, right? And so I was like, because I was like wondering, what would it, because to me it would be like, yeah, certain people would have to have certain experiences or be surrounded by certain people so that when this new thing comes along and it just suddenly changes their minds, because it's not that it changes their minds suddenly, but they're now aware of that change that's happening inside of them or something. I don't know. Does this make sense? I hope it does.
Um, yeah, kind of. I was thinking, you said that it was like experiencing like you were shattering, right?
Yeah,
And then
it's weird
and you
because like this happened twice. Because like I also became vegan recently, and I just saw a video, like for example, about animal abuses and such, and that one video just clicked everything for me from my experiences with animals and all of that. And it's like it does feel like a shattering of like
a sh
your sense of self or something. I don't know.
all right. Well, I
Yeah.
think this is my feeling, but I feel like the ego dissolution from psychedelics is less like a shattering, but more like a flow, like you're reforming. And it's like I think of it like physical materials. I don't know if that's right, but like if it's like shattering, it's because the
Yeah,
prior
like
becomes.
the prior belief like shatters, right? Like it shatters right in front of you, then it just for like it reconstructs itself, basically.
But
I think
you like you're not you didn't experience like a shattering of your like all of your mind. You just felt like a prior had just been destroyed, like crumbled.
good question. I'm not sure because it does feel like it.
Like your brain is fracturing. Because I think I've just been visualizing like the psychedelic changing of mind is like it softens your mind in terms of like a material. Like not that this is literally what's happening, but it's like maybe like when you have like really constrained priors that are like informing, they're like telling the low level information what is actually going on, whether they're right or wrong. They're like a hard like material, and hard materials are like, like they stay where they are, which is like very useful. But if you hit them really hard, they're brittle, they'll break, because if you make something too hard, they become brittle. But then with psychedelics, you can like just soften everything into like a jelly, and then like everything's more malleable, and like instead of breaking, it like shifts and like remolds into something new. That's how I was kind of
Oh,
thinking
okay.
about it. So I feel like I don't know. I just don't know if the fracturing is like the same. I mean, it has to be the same thing because it's like the brain changing, but I wonder if it like behaves differently. I mean, this doesn't really necessarily relate to science and that well because it's just like my visualization of it. But I don't know. That was just my thoughts on like what the psychedelic version of your mind shifting was versus like a belief shattering before your eyes. But I don't know, like of what the experience you had was, whether it was a lot like a psychedelic one or not.
Oh, I've never taken one, so maybe I should try. Maybe I'll find out that way.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
So there's no way
Report back. Report back.
your
Well, in a way,
connection.
it kind of what this kind of implies is that the whole idea of a rigid boundary is really like a delusional belief, and if you take this drug, which dissolves, which allows information that would ordinarily be filtered out, because you're born and everybody says, "Oh, I am a rugged individual" or something like that, and then suddenly you take this drug and you say, "Wait, what? Really? That doesn't make any sense, really." That would be a shattering of that prior belief that you're like this isolated, thing that doesn't, has this iron boundary between you and the rest of the world, which is, in my opinion, is just totally false, and so if you if you took a hallucinogen that exposed that delusional belief that you have, yeah, that would be good. that would be, a therapist would say, "Oh yeah, what, a W for me,"
Well, maybe one way to access the positive benefits of psychedelics is just to travel and talk to lots and lots of people. Because you can just, you can access all that information that would deconstruct the really ingrained priors at the high level.
I'm kind of aware of your context in terms of psychedelics, and so I just wanted to read you something from the Brower paper, which is the pivotal mental states one. So, as one view is that near-death experience and associated hyperplasticity may function to aid individual of such life or death scenarios were to be met. Oh, sorry, no, before that. Near-death experience are relevant to the theory that the serotonin that we've been talking about, the 2A1, has evolved to aid psychological transformation for adaptive ends. That's been coming up a lot. Altered perceptual processing, heightened emotional tone, time dilation, and enhanced episodic memory encoding are all features of near-death experiences. Major shifts in perspective following near-death experiences may be the product of a period of hyperplasticity, potentially mediated by either the release of this particular 5-HT serotonin, or indeed specifically this, specifically serotonin that's going to trigger this receptor. So the example here is such as DMT during the dying process. So DMT, as I understand, sometimes is present as people perhaps experience the near-death experience. That's kind of part of this. So there's a reference here to a paper, Dean et al., which I can also point to you if that's something that you're interested in. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, after this, I'll probably still have to finish reading the paper itself because I still haven't finished reading REBUS.
Can we do a part 2? Part 2.
Part two. Maybe. What are we doing
a lot
for
of
the next one?
material, that's for sure.
Yeah, there's so much material.